Hey, this is Scott of photographybanzai.com. Today I want to talk about operating systems and how they relate to photography, post-processing, and also videography, such as these YouTube videos that I make. I've had quite a few issues lately trying to get quality sound, trying to get decent video, especially trying to do screencasts. Had some big issues with that. Finding software that I needed, finding software that functioned properly, finding software that could record large videos properly and be able to edit them, adding overlays and all that. But what I did recently was switch back to Windows from Linux, more specifically Kubuntu or Kubuntu, however they say it. But I made a list of positives and negatives of Linux and Windows, how I've experienced them in relation to creating, artworks or videos or something. So I'll start with Windows. More finished software that is the usability is high. I think there's a lot more in Windows. There are some good software, especially for photography these days. There are more open source things, but there's still, of course I use Photoshop, so that's a high level to be comparing things at, and I used Photoshop for a significant amount of time. Also, even with Linux and with Wine emulation, that was getting better. I'll mention that once I get to the Linux list. But a big one for me was audio. I was having significant issues with Linux, getting proper audio recordings without popping, noises, static, all of that, getting proper levels of recordings. I had significant problems with that. I tried Kubuntu, I tried Mint, SUSE Linux, or OpenSUSE, that's the one it is, but had problems. So let's see the next one for Windows. I had to switch to Vista, so it's not exactly the best indicator for Windows, but multitasking is not as good as Linux in various ways. Things hang up more, things, the visuals of application pause and then you get a white screen more often than in Linux. But basically Windows multitasking isn't as good for the one that I'm using. Also, I've been having some 32-bit, 64-bit issues with video files in Windows. I've been able to get around it by re-encoding videos. So when I do a screencast, I use something called the MSI Afterburner program. It's funny, the most random piece of software that I've found is one of the best screencast recorders. But it uses mjpeg with some type of format that isn't quite compatible with my version of Sony Vegas Movie Studio Platinum version 9. I even tried the most recent version in a trial, had the same exact issues. So I think it has something to do with the way the files are structured, or maybe the codec is slightly different than other types of JPEG, and just I have to either re-encode or do something like that, and then I don't have too many problems. But that just adds some extra time to the process. I've also mentioned how in Linux I couldn't even get that far, so I'll talk about that. And you can even see my older videos and see the quality of sound now and the quality of sound before. there is a difference. Next one, codecs are more difficult to manage in Windows. It's difficult to find the proper codecs that function properly, but I've gotten around all of that so far. Next one, I mentioned with the Vegas Movie Studio. You know, it's a cheaper program, but it hasn't worked with those mjpeg encoded screencasts too well. But actually, to start off, it wouldn't run at all, but I found a way to get that working. Next one, Windows isn't that good for development work because the path structures are basically poor, I think, in comparison to Linux. All of the ways to use the console and things, Linux is significantly better. I've done some Android apps and things like that, and I prefer doing it on Linux. Next one is challenge of finding good screen capture applications. I thought it would be better in Windows, but it's not that much better than Linux. I've managed, like I said, with the MSI Afterburner program. It's basically focused on your GPU and all of the settings in there, but it includes a screen capture application that functions quite well. It's simple. It does exactly what I want. It just records the whole screen in a decent, format that it doesn't make completely massive uncompressed videos, or it doesn't make super compressed low quality junk either. But that works quite well, except for the issue with Sony Vegas and everything else. I tried various different editor applications, so there's some type of 32-bit, 64-bit file size limit issue or something. So that's about it for Windows stuff. With Linux, I think the 64-bit, 32-bit differences and support are a lot better with Linux. I never really had issues with file sizes being weird with videos. If I made large video files, I never really had a problem. I used KDE and Live. That's the video editor that I used a lot. Works quite well. It was a little bit buggy, but at times I even had it completely stop working because of software updates. So that's kind of one of the issues with Linux that I had. But I've pretty much used that successfully. The editor was decent. I never had problems with file sizes. Workspaces are a handy feature in Linux. It comes default with 4, so you can switch between them, and you can have full screen applications on one screen, or you can put the ones that you're doing processing on another. And multitasking in general is a lot better in Linux than it is in the version of Windows that I've been using. I might try to get an upgrade to Windows 8. It's supposed to be pretty cheap, like $40, so I'll probably do that, but let's see if it's better. I haven't even tried it yet, but I assume it's faster and more efficient and everything from what I've read. So next one is Wine emulation. As I've said, I've used Photoshop for a long time. I'm used to it. The current version that I have, 5, functions really well with photography. I use Adobe Bridge for doing edits of my RAWs, and then I do a batch process, and that works really well. I'll probably make a video about that in the future. But with the Wine emulation in Linux, it just, up until maybe half a year ago, I finally was able to get Bridge functioning properly, and that really worked pretty well, except for some features that didn't function. But it was quick, and it allowed me to edit my photos properly. So in that way it's decent. However, I'd say only about 75% functional with Photoshop. The HDR stuff didn't work. Some of the things like seeing EXIF data in Photoshop, that thing in the file menu didn't function. Various little things that were irritating, and especially bad was after a certain update, the mouse and the drawing functions didn't function properly. So you press down the mouse button and then you tried to draw a line with the brush, it would stop. And then you have to kind of press the mouse right at a certain quickness that it finally drew a line. But yeah, so Windows emulation isn't the best thing in Linux. Next one, there are a decent amount of photo apps for Linux, but I didn't quite feel that they were where I wanted them to be, you know, the way that I do things. So I never really use them that much. I stick to Photoshop even when it was only somewhat functional. The next one, although I did use F-Spot a lot to import my photos into a storage drive where that sorts everything by date and everything. So I'm going to see if F-Spot works for Windows, because I know it's a mono application. So I might use that for the same thing. Next one, I had a lot of issues with the video files from Pentax K7, K5. They use another mjpeg format with, I think it's some type of custom PCM audio codec. I mean, PCM should be a universal format, but I was getting popping sounds with any program that uses FFmpeg. So it's pretty much the same on Windows, but more stuff uses FFmpeg on Linux than Windows. So I have that issue more often. I have to re-encode the videos, or no, what I do was I extract the audio file and then I save it, I open it up and I extract it with VLC, and then it's usable WAV file, and then I generally edit it with Audacity. That's a pretty good audio editor. Next one, screen capture applications. Terrible situation with Linux. I could never really get a decent quality level with audio, and then with a program that had good audio, it had terrible video codec support, or with one that had good video codec support, it had terrible audio support. And I just never found an application that functioned with both of them and allowed me to really just do a decent screencast video. I don't know. It's a program where I should take up the call, but that's too much effort to make something like that. Next one, Linux is really good for everyday tasks, programming, browsing, all that stuff. I prefer, these days I prefer the interface and the multitasking ability of Linux, but without the software support and without, you know, all of that, it's just still frustrating to use. The audio I had a lot of problems with. At least now, these days, the video is a little bit better. It's functional enough. Back quite a few years ago, I was using Linux, and I always had problems with the video. I had to configure everything myself and just to get decent video function in the in the operating system visual interface. That's about it for my talk between those two operating systems. I've never owned an Apple computer, so I don't know. I assume it's easier, but that's what everyone says. But I don't have that type of money to spend on that. So it's about it. Like I said, if you have any comments, suggestions, ways you do things, or questions, anything, feel free to ask. Thanks.